Good morning. How's everybody? Great. All right. Quick huddle for today. All right. Who has seen one of those? All right. Yes. Thank you. I love it. Boo. All right. So RE forms. All right. What do we have to say about RE forms besides boo? Let's get specific. Okay. Lanier, go ahead.
Incredibly hard to find the relevant information.
True statement. Here's a script that I use all the time. RE forms do not provide the same level of protections for both buyers and sellers that Georgia real estate contract documents provide. Okay? These are adequate for legal purposes as a contract. However, when you get down into the nitty-gritty, it's very, very difficult to pull the information out to see the things that you typically like to see. You know, when you've had a GAR contract, you know exactly where to go look for all the things that are red flags in your mind. You don't know with RE forms, okay? And I'm gonna give you some perfect examples and illustrations of exactly why, all right? And then we're gonna talk about what happens if you are a listing agent and you receive an offer on RE forms, all right? So RE forms, they are readily available, and the reason why people use them all the time is because they are right here in your forms library within Docs Plus. Also, just a note of something to think about. If you get an RE form, what do you immediately attribute to the agent that is presenting that on an RE form? Part-time, not serious about their career, unable to do a board membership. That ought to tell you something. Note, don't be that agent, okay? If you happen to be either in this room or on that call and you are an agent that hasn't gotten your board yet, we understand that sometimes can happen. However, don't fret, do not be afraid. If you yourself are not a board member, you can leverage the fact that our brokerage is a board member and you can still use these forms, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, okay? If you come in here and you are not a board member and you do not have access to them, I suggest you do, and then we can update the system with your NRDS number so that you have access to them. But if you don't, it is very, very simple. All you have to do is go to, when you are in your package library, instead of going to the Georgia, you go to the Century 21. We have all of the packages available to you and all of the forms available to you through Century 21 menu so that you don't have to utilize RE forms. Okay, all you have to do is load them from the package menu. All right. Now let's talk about what happens when you receive an offer on RE forms from another agent on your listing. What do you do with it?
I appreciate the offer. Can you resubmit it on a GAR form?
Absolutely. And they say,
I don't have access
to GAR forms.
I'll send you one.
Bingo. Here are the GAR forms. This is, you know what? Make us the bad guy. Make the brokerage the bad guy in this situation. Say, unfortunately, my brokerage requires it to be submitted on a GAR form. Here are all the appropriate forms that you are likely to need. You should be pretty familiar with these. And if you don't have access to them through your broker can probably help you with them. Okay?
There's probably a good chance they've heard that before.
There is a really good chance that they've heard that before. Yep, exactly. All right. And so and in that case, all you need to do is go into your GAR docs, go to the forms library, download the appropriate forms and email them over to that co-op agent and let them figure out the rest. Okay? I would probably be courteous enough to, since you're requiring an extra step on their part, to give them some additional time. You know, before you make a decision on an offer. If you've got multiple offers, you might want to wait till they submit it on the appropriate forms for you to get through that. All right? Let me tell you a real-world practical example that's going to illustrate to the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is timelines on your contract. And it deals with a contract that an agent in this brokerage received on RE forms, apparently didn't know that this was a possibility to send them the new forms. And I quote, this contract is very confusing. I'm not sure when my contingency dates are up. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you don't know where to look for anything. Here was the issue, is because she didn't know where to look for the things in this particular case, there was a sale contingency. The contract was supposed to close the end of November, but the sale contingency was, we have to sell the other house. Guess how long that sale contingency was for? It was like a 40-day close period. The sale contingency was 90 days. Okay, so the sale contingency went past the closing date. Did that agent just write their client into a corner? Kind of, sort of. That's the kind of thing you got to think about. And it was because it was on RE form that she didn't know where to look for that exact date that I think that contributed to the fact that it got missed. Okay, so let's talk about timelines on a contract. All right, and stuff you got to think about, because this is not an uncommon problem. What I just outlined to you, having dates that don't make sense with where you're supposed to close, it's prevalent in probably a lot of the contracts that are being written. Okay, so let's talk about a timeline, and we're going to do time across that. All right, so you write an offer, say today, what is today, October 27th?
Yes.
Am I right? You spend another day or two negotiating that contract, and you finally go binding on, let's just say for the sake of argument, November 1st. We are binding. Okay? We've got some contingencies now. Okay, so the first contingency is what? Due diligence period. So let's just say for the sake of argument, the 7th. So now you're going to be going, your due diligence period ends on November 8th. Everybody good so far? Actually, there's one other timeline in here.
Won't it be November 9th? Earnest money.
Yeah, earnest money time.
Yeah, you're right, earnest money. First,
Because you don't count the first though. Day 0 is first, right? The day it goes binding is day 0, and then every day, and then day
Right.
1 is November 2nd.
2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. 7th day.
Got it, just kidding.
Okay. So your earnest money, if your earnest money is in 3 days, then what are we looking at? November 4th, right? So squeeze that in there. The next one is what? Finance? In most cases. Typically 21 days. So now you're looking at November, what are we looking at? 22nd? Okay. Then you're looking at appraisal. How many people do the appraisal the exact same time as the finance contingency?
Ask the lender.
Typically ask the lender. I got some good advice, and I don't even remember what the reasoning and the rationale behind it was, but a closing attorney once told me, don't make them the same day. Separate them by a day, 2 days, because then you've got some options if the proverbial doo-doo hits the fan, okay? So you could do that either 21, 23, 25, and then you're just gonna do November 22nd again, all right? In this case, you may have one other contingency, which is the sale contingency. In this case, it was 90 days, okay? Which would put you out to, what are we talking about, January timeframe?
February.
Yeah, you're right, probably February. But yet, closing date was supposed to be November 28th. Problem?
Yeah.
Big problem, okay? That's really easy and obvious to see, but let's talk about one other, is closing date is November 28th, but the financing contingency is November 27th. You're representing the seller. How do you answer the seller when the day before the closing date is supposed to happen, you get the call from the buyer's agent saying, our loan can't go through, we're not going to be able to close tomorrow. The day before, your client is ready to close. They've already moved out. They've already had a packer there. They're already in temporary accommodations. They may be spending money for those temporary accommodations because you haven't budgeted enough time buffer between the closing date and the last contingency. You could really be doing a disservice to your client. Okay, so always, 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 when you are evaluating an offer or when you are writing an offer, you should be taking into consideration these timelines to be able to know that, I mean, even when I'm submitting an offer as representing the buyer, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, well, if my contingency date ends here and my closing date is here, does that give that seller enough time to move out and know with confidence that they're going to be able to close? And that's the way I build it. I don't try to write ourselves into a situation where the contingency is after the closing date. Okay? So always keep that in mind. Always remember that as you're writing offers and when you're evaluating offers, it's your job to look at those timelines and to make sure that it makes sense based off of what your client is trying to do. Any questions?
I get all that, and I agree. But let's say we close,
Okay?
I mean, it's pointless anyway, it's January or February.
Mm-hmm.
What, I understand the seller's perspective, but overdoing it, what harm would it do if you close anyways?
How would you close?
How would you
Well,
close if it
talking about
hasn't?
The sales contingency, the 90-day one,
Mm-hmm.
you already closed, you got the finance, you got the appraisal, everything, you closed November 20th.
But my client hasn't sold their other sale contingency.
Okay.
It was contingent upon that sale, and that sale had not yet happened. So then it came down to, all right, what do we do now?
Okay, so what if the seller went ahead and agreed with a 90-day contingency on the sale? Would you have to have another appraisal, another finance contingency because of interest rate, et cetera?
Depends on the lender, depends on what kind of loan program that they were in, probably not.
It also
The loan wouldn't get approved anyway.
The loan wouldn't go through final clear to close anyway at that point.
Okay.
Yeah,
So self-contingency, pretty much, they had to sell their previous house before they can buy it.
right.
Correct. A good thing to look for is, you know, if you are gonna take a sales contingency, is if they're under contract and like how much, you know,
Yeah.
are they through due diligence, you know,
How far have they gotten?
yeah,
What is, go to the MLS, look at their projected close date,
that's right.
make sure that your sale contingency is maybe the day after that projected
sure
close
that
date.
There's not a contingency on their contract.
Uh-huh.
Because like,
Domino.
it's become a ridiculous, chain of.
Very, very true.
garbage.
Very, very true.
I've lost one because the buyer's buyer
Mm-hmm.
didn't sell their house. That one fell out, so ours fell, yeah.
Yep.
Dominoes.
Dominoes. Gotta love them. Any other questions?
How about the 8-day unilateral to extend closing? Even if you planned it out perfect and they drop that on you, and you've given your clients, I don't know, 5 days.
Unfortunately, it is a right given to both parties by Georgia state law. Not much you can do about it. Other than if you can remove and you can write a special stip in to remove that 8-day unilateral right. I wouldn't do that in most cases unless it's already been extended 2 or 3 times already, kind of.
You might want it yourself too. You never know.
Exactly, exactly.
Are there any restrictions on that 8-day unilateral? Because I've used it before and some folks, they're telling me that I can't use it because of this reason. And
It has to be for, I think, 3 or 4 specific reasons.
yeah.
And it depends on if it's for the buyer or for the seller. The seller could use it if they're not able to convey title for some particular reason. The buyer could use it if the lender or the closing attorney can't complete their documents and get everything signed, like the 3-day acknowledgement, the RESPA requirement. If they can't get that, then they can use the 8-day for that.
Yeah, right there at the top of it, it's gonna list out those 4 reasons.
Yeah.
As to how it could be used and why it would be appropriate.
It's not an automatic, I just need 8 more days.
You have to send them proof because
No.
they're asking me for proof of that. And
That's the
it's
thing,
like,
you don't-
What do you want? I would tell them my house. What do you want? What do you want?
You shouldn't have to.
You don't.
It's like if
Yeah.
you tell them the reason and they don't find it, like I had an issue where the lender was giving too much information to the listing agent,
Yeah.
and she wasn't gonna accept my 8-day unilateral, and I tell it, mortgage officer, I was like, just shut the hell up, I'll mark it.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't tell her.
And then he shut up and we used the 8 days.
The only explanation you need to provide is the check mark next to the appropriate line on that 8-day unilateral notice. That's all it is. All right? All right, let's go to Buck.